Hello and welcome back. I hope you had good coffee. I am a coffee expert, so I would like to hear later what you thought about the coffee, because I haven't had one. I would like to introduce you to this session, which is called Creative Careers, and to two of my friends. I cry easily, as you might have seen, so I might cry, but it's Lotta Borg Skoglund from Sweden, and Lotta is an associate professor of psychiatry at Uppsala University, as well as an affiliate researcher at Karolinska Institute, which is a very important institute where they nominate Nobel Prize winners and so on. She is an expert on ADHD in general, and ADHD and autism in girls and women in particular. And tomorrow, Lotta will give a big talk about that super important subject, because we have failed the girls up till now. But Lotta is a trailblazer and is very popular in Scandinavia, I would say, often in the TV sofas and talking and championing girls with ADHD. So Lotta is also has time to write books in between everything and having 5 children, and has written a trilogy of which the first one, called ADHD, From Good Girl to Burnt Out Woman, which was a bestseller in Scandinavia, will be published by Jessica Kingsley in the UK in the autumn. And the other 2 books are called, the second one is called Black Belt in Parenting, and the third one is called ADHD in the Workplace, which is why Lotta is going to talk here today. The second speaker is Charlotte, amazing Charlotte Garnett, who is known as the anti-anxiety jeweler. And Charlotte and her anti-anxiety jewelry has featured in magazines all over the world. She trained at St. Martin's in London and has, since she graduated, I don't know how many years ago? 2015, challenged her passion for raising awareness for social matters into functional and contemporary jewelry collections. Her ergonomically designed pieces are designed to encourage mental health being. And Charlotte has created a special collection for ITAKOM called the ITAKOM Collection, which you will talk about later, and it's inspired by your amazing trip to Antarctica. So without further ado, I leave the podium to you, Lotta.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie, for such a nice introduction. And first of all, I would like to say it's such a huge honor to be here and to speak to all of you and to be invited. I'm going to talk about ADHD in the workplace. And I've been listening now to Sven and to Rory. And that was a great inspiring actually for this talk, because neurodevelopmental disorders could never exist in a vacuum, right? They always exist in relation to their environment. And it's not that long ago that we thought that ADHD, autism, was something that would just, that child and adolescent psychiatrist had to deal with. Me, as an adult psychiatrist, I didn't really have to train for that, because something magical happened when people turned 18, and poof, those diagnoses just, it was easier before, right? Now we're facing a situation much more realistic, namely that 25 up to 25 or up to 75% of those children fulfilling the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, ADD, autism will continue to live with impairing symptoms throughout their lives. It might look very different. These diagnoses can look very different in different people, right? It's a heterogeneous family of diagnoses, but it can also look very different in the same individual across life. So that's why Martina and I chose to write this book, ADHD in the Workplace. And as I've done in my other books as well, I have so many nice and funny and inspiring patients, so I tend to write books together with them. Also, research, I'm sorry, Sven, but it's so boring. It's so boring to read, and it's so boring to write. And once you have to do all that background research, and you get to know a lot of stuff that is relevant in my patients' lives, I like to put it down in a pop science book instead. That's passion for me. So this is what I'm going to try to walk you through. This is just my disclosures. I'm sure Sophie will provide them for you if you want to look at them afterwards. But first, just let's look at Mia here. She's 47 years old, and she is the project manager at home and at work. She's always the go-to woman when something needs to be organized, when you need to remodel the office kitchen, or when you need to plan for the next after-work party, because she's so structured. And she seems like she has everything together. But what she said when it came to me is like, I've been to so many psychiatrists now, and they really don't see behind what I am achieving. They don't see how much energy and time I spend to be this structured and this organized. And for Mia, it's like, it doesn't really show when she is in her workplace. What her colleagues don't know is that she doesn't get very much done actually at work, but she collects everything because she's a good girl and she is a good colleague and employee. So she collects everything because she doesn't want it to end up in someone else's lap. So she collects it and she goes home and she works and works and works through the evenings, through the nights sometimes. Fall asleep, exhausted, just to race to another morning where everything starts all over again. The weekends, she spends them like curled up with blanks down, so she doesn't see and get, anxiety from, the sunshine and the people living their lives out there. And then Monday again starts all over again. And it's really just her and her family who knows about this. She's also, when she came, she said, I think I suffer from the broken record syndrome. Have you heard of that? I think that's an amazing expression when it comes to ADHD. As Russell Barkley says, ADHD is not about knowing what to do. It's about doing what you know, right? And when you know what to do, and you still keep doing something else, that takes kind of a serious turn on your self-esteem. And again, as Rusty say, we don't have to remind people about this because they know. Their inner voices are almost always the harshest. So I start, again inspired by Russell Barkley actually, with a study that he and his co-workers published a couple of years ago showing that just by fulfilling 4 letters, ADHD, you will have a shortened life expectancy of 8 to 13 years. So when we say that, well, ADHD, doesn't everyone has like a little fling of that nowadays? Doesn't everyone has to have like a letter combination that would explain why they fail or why they, have so much friction in their lives all the time? That's not true. The truth is that ADHD is a really serious condition, taking up to 13 years out of someone's life, regardless of sex, socioeconomic status, and age. But I usually want to end that dramatic quote with something more positive, because ADHD also has a really good prognosis, right? Because all these 8 to 13 years, we can do something about them. Because they're almost always about lifestyle-related factors. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that tomorrow when we talk about ADHD and girls and women. And also, it doesn't always show on the outside, right? And that might be something that we are grateful for, that not all impairments are visual for everyone else, but it's also kind of difficult to get the right help and to get the right understanding for your impairment. So what I like to start with, what I guess we're all here to kind of work with and that we all are aiming at, regardless if we work in a school or if we work in a healthcare sector or the social services. We would like as many children and adults to live as many years as possible with as much mental health as possible. And then we don't really have to, deal that much with the diagnosis. I hope, and I think I share that with many of you, that someday in the future, these diagnoses that are today really, rough, they contain, a person contains so much more than their diagnosis, right? Sven was talking about that earlier today. So they're, in a way, they're limiting us in how we view other people, but they are the best that we have right now. So we have to kind of adhere to it in some way, right? But I hope in the future that we look beyond these diagnoses and we see what are the underlying neuropsychological processes that actually explain the individual or the heterogeneity of our behaviors. And looking at that, we can also look at what are the prerequisites for someone to actually be able to live with mental health, with good mental health. I think that is the first thing when I meet another person in my work that I try to establish. So where are we on these prerequisites? So what I've boiled this down to, and you are free to challenge me with this. I might have missed some of the points, and I might have exaggerated it, but I think for a human being, regardless of if you have a diagnosis or not, you need to understand, somehow regulate, and then communicate your emotions to other people to get your basic needs met, right? Emotions are really important. They're a carrier of really important messages. But these messages are kind of rough, and we have to do something with them. We have to regulate them, we have to handle them somehow, and we have to communicate them in a way so that others understand us, right? And I also think that we as humans, and I think that this might be the thing that actually differs us from other animals the most, that we can think in a future that is not yet happened. So we can think into the future, and we can try to plan and have a goal-oriented behavior towards the future. And that's really important if you want to live a life with mental health and physical health, right? And we will need to have the ability to accept that however good we are planning in the future, things are going to change. There are going to be factors that we cannot affect, and we have to accept that, and we have to adapt to that. And we have, because we are social creatures, we have to be able to initiate and sustain good, healthy, constant social relationships. Are you with me on this 4? Are you also with me when I say that these 4, one each or everyone together, is a direct threat? Or ADHD, autism, ADD is a direct threat to one or many of these 4 fundamental factors for mental health. And then it gets really, serious. Then we get down to business, I think. And then I don't get so upset when people say, well, ADHD, everyone has it today, right? It's not that important, it's not that. It is. It's a direct threat for, against everything that we are working for. It's also unfortunate, and now we're going to go into the working life, that the more intelligent you are, the later you are going to get your diagnosis. It's a perfect association. And that's like what Mia is saying. She is masking, she is compensating, she is finding strategies that, makes, and Rusty was talking about that too, that you have other skills. You're talented in other areas that makes the environment or people around you not realizing how hard you are struggling with this stuff. So, the modern workplace. What might be the problem here? Well, I think the first thing that I would like to lift together with you, and you will have to help me now with, good, there's the pictures. I think the first thing that we should do and what we could do together is also to highlight the stigma and the ignorance that is still out there. Many people, or many of my patients at least, they say, when we have done the assessment, they say, okay, so now what? I have gotten this diagnosis. Should I tell everyone? Should I go? Because that is, for many, the first kind of impulse. It is such a relief. As Rusty said, you were expecting it. It's a sadness in some way, but it's also such a relief. Now, finally, I understand myself. I want others to understand me as well. And you run out in the world, and you go straight into the wall of ignorance and stigma. Because very many of my patients also tells me that it's so great that you're open. Oh, they get all this, positive feedback in the beginning, but then when it starts to be problems and it starts to be conflicts at work, they're also the ones that get blamed for it. And on a personal level, individuals with ADHD, we know that from research, that it is a diagnosis that, it's hard to live up to your full potential. And the reports and the research, they paint a very gloomy picture, unfortunately. Rory. What did I say? Rory. Yeah. Not that good with names. No. So if you look at the research, that is the gloomy picture. Individuals with ADHD, they have a higher rate of sick leaves, short-term employments, a lot of more conflicts at work, uneven performances. It's also very much harder to stop work. And I think probably someone would call me a workaholic because she, just keep working after work hours, but that's actually a strategy for her. And this wonderful and mystery work-life balance, right? That we are all struggling with. But looking at the research, individuals with ADHD, adults with ADHD, they struggle even more. And they don't get the ends to meet in the work-life balance. And employers, we interviewed quite a lot of employers in this book as well, and they tell us, well, it's hard because we don't know what to do. And many of them were really interested in knowing more about ADHD, but they did not know where to find the tools and the knowledge. So sometimes it looks like this. I have ADHD, okay, I know that now, I've done the assessment, but will they have enough knowledge once I go to my workplace when I talk to them? And the employers say, well, we want to work with this, but we got the information too late. And everything is, so much has happened. It's very hard to mend this. And then perhaps having ADHD, you mask and you feel that you never reach out to your full potential and you get exhausted. And as an employee, you see that you lose a lot of valuable employees. And then perhaps if you have your diagnosis and that still doesn't do it for you, you start finding other explanations. So it's so much at home, or I don't think I'm really that interested in this anymore. I'm going to do something else. I want to explore other options. And as an employer, you feel that you try to do things and it's costly, but it doesn't really lead anywhere. So this we have to change. So what can we do? First, some bad advice. Because being a neurodivergent person means that you are like a 5% outlier. The society, the workplace, the world is usually modeled by the other 95%. So, but they are the ones that giving you the advice, right? So you get a lot of advice like you did not know, right? And after a while, you get really tired of saying, well, it's not the facts, really, that's missing. It's just that I can't get it done. But just get started. Try to keep calm during the meeting. It's not a good idea to say to your boss that. Right? Well, I kind of know that. It's just that I kind of said it anyway, and I realized it 0.1 second too late. So it doesn't really help me then that you kind of try to make me understand. I already understand that. Try not to interrupt, plan ahead, listen carefully. It's like you're not listening to me. Well, what I think, and what we try to highlight in this book also, and what I also try to highlight always when I work with my patients, it's this is getting an ADHD diagnosis is also getting a lot of responsibility. This is a lot of knowledge about you yourself, how your brain works, and perhaps having a realistic feeling of what you can do to change the world. Perhaps you have to start with yourself, right? And I think that's a very important first step. The self-awareness and the knowledge that you have, you can maneuver much more skill in the environment, in the workplace, by knowing that. You don't really have to change that much of the world. Because many people, they put a lot of effort into trying to change the workplace or try to change the world or try to change their family. And I think that I would rather that we ask ourselves, when am I the most challenged and when I'm the most stressed? Under what circumstances do I perform optimally? What gives or takes energy? And try to communicate that to others. Try to put that in me message or I message. So, before I let you go, what can we do for more diversity, more inclusion? Well, I'd say transparency, predictability, and frequent follow-up. That is basically the same thing that we are teaching for children and teachers in school, right? That every piece of the puzzle counts. It's a good thing that we are different. We just have to know what are my strengths and what are my vulnerable sides. Then I can maneuver very skillfully throughout the world that is not designed for me. We have to defeat stigma and advocate for diversity, and I think that's what we're doing here today and tomorrow. And we are thriving and aiming for an open and accepting environment that free all this potential. And that's a nice thing. That's a nice thing to say. Everyone should live according to their full potential, but it's also a very, very good socio-economically investment, right? So I have already gone too far. Just to set the stage for you, ADHD is another way to process information, maneuver in life. Most can and want to contribute. The labor market is not static. We can all influence. And success and sustainability, if given the right circumstances. So thank you.
Thank you, Lotta. What a speech to follow. Fantastic. Particularly a lot of things that were very familiar to me there, especially thinking about the idea of what conditions do we work optimally under. So hopefully by telling you my story, that can illustrate some of the things from a neurodivergent point of view. So, I may not have the right clicker. I'll swap to another clicker. Oh, we've got fabulous. There we go. Lovely. When I was a kid, I was told I was weird. My constant theatrical performances, my hair, my monkey-like need to climb trees, my intense personality, all weird. Whilst the tree thing was perhaps a bit odd, I now realise that the things I used to be so ashamed of are now the things that help me succeed. When I was invited to speak here, I asked myself, as you may be, what can a jewellery designer contribute to a mental health conference? Well, I believe that neurodiversity gives us a unique perspective that lies outside the typical. Being different doesn't make us less than. In fact, difference is the very genesis of originality and creativity, and being our authentic selves is the key to a fulfilling life. I'm Charlotte Garnett, the anti-anxiety jeweller. I'm a neurodivergent jewellery artist, and I create contemporary therapeutic jewellery pieces. And if it weren't for my mental illnesses, I wouldn't have half a cooler job as I do. So who am I? For someone who starts most emails with no worries, I do in fact have quite a lot of worries. I realized something was different about me when I was about 7 years old. I am now diagnosed with chronic depression, anxiety, and an eating disorder. Whilst I received my first diagnosis around 16, fighting against my mind in a world that let me know in no uncertain terms that I was faulty had been the focus of my entire life. I quickly noticed that my peers didn't think and feel in the same way as me, and my intensity and deep emotions were not desirable. Teachers called me naughty, my peers called me weird. Weird was that word that hung around my neck for a long time. Some traits of my neurodiversity can be equally as helpful as they are harmful. An example of this is perfectionism and passion. They led me to scrutinize every perceived failure through a hugely magnified lens, never being good enough, desperate to gain control and become perfect. A seemingly endless depth of daily emotions gave me overwhelming drive. Great, unless you're driven to become less like your weird self. So why would I still put these traits on my resume today? Perfectionism lets me see things in great detail. When you choose to work on things on a very small scale, that's very useful. I can feel assured that no matter the task, I will inherently give my all in the pursuit of the best. The intensity of my emotions is exhausting, of course, but motivating, absolutely. Finding the positives of these traits went from feeling like they were an anchor to feeling like they were a jetpack. Once I'd identified the benefits of these differences, I needed to find a professional niche where they could thrive. So what is that niche? Today, I design and make tactile jewelry, which are sensory pieces to help cope with day-to-day anxiety. I create pieces inspired by my own anxious needs that can be used instinctively and discreetly and worn with pride. I create my jewelry with the intent to destigmatize mental health. When I started creating anti-anxiety jewelry, the niche did not exist. Back then, the best you could get was a stress ball or a cheap spinner ring that would turn your finger green. The best solution a therapist gave me was to wear an elastic band to help cope with self-harm urges and snap it against my wrist. But aside from being deeply unfashionable, it was quite embarrassing, and it just didn't work great either. I wanted to change this and make something that actually worked and was actually desirable. Art had always been the outlet for my emotions, and since I could hold a pencil, I drew my overwhelming feelings. It's my anxiety brain here. I depicted my feelings with the aim of one day using them to make myself feel understood, a way of working I continued into my jewelry design degree. Everything changed one day at uni. I had a critique with the jewelry artist Naomi Filmer, and she was someone I was quite starstruck by and really anxious to impress. She bluntly told me that my presented ideas weren't going to work and asked what was going on because something clearly was. I garbled out, had just got an anxiety diagnosis, and I was not coping. She responded by asking, "So why isn't your work about that?" With that simple question, the penny dropped, and I suddenly realized maybe I could do something about my feelings instead of just stating them. Maybe I could create my own coping mechanisms. Once I started, I had a never-ending pool of inspiration in my own struggles, and suddenly I wasn't wallowing it, I was riding the wave. So how does my work work? Whether struggling with severe anxious disorders or with the stress of everyday life, most of us have developed natural coping mechanisms. I started by paying attention to my own coping mechanisms. What was I doing when I was anxious? What did I find? I picked up my nail varnish, I spun my piercings, I pulled out my eyelashes, occupied my hands. None of these were conscious tactics to soothe myself. Obviously, I don't think one bald eye has been particularly fashionable. I needed to find out why these things helped me. I realized what I was doing was stimming. Stims are repetitive behaviors that help individuals process overwhelming sensory input. Stimming behaviours are not often recognised outside of neurodiverse people. However, they are actually extremely valuable inbuilt mechanisms that protect us from overstimulation and have been present in society much longer than we might think. If you bounce your foot, bite your nails, pull at your hair, or fiddle with your earrings in uncomfortable situations, you've engaged in stimming to some extent. I also started to delve into research surrounding grounding, mindfulness, and object handling therapy, the ways that our sense of touch help us to self-soothe. So, object handling therapy. Object handling therapy, simply put, is the positive effect that repetitively handling an object has on our emotions, our ability to process, and our overall mental well-being. In Emily Holmes' 2004 study, she stated, keeping your hands and mind busy interferes with the encoding of information, and this could lead to a new intervention for post-traumatic stress. Tactile stimulation is key to aiding the disruption and distraction of negative thought processes. Grounding. Grounding techniques I was taught in therapy focus on a similar methodology, distraction and disruption of anxious mental spiraling to reorientate oneself. Grounding techniques focus the mind on simple things that interact with your senses in the present. And mindfulness, that ever misused term, referring to the technique of focusing on the present, acknowledging our thoughts and bodily feelings to avoid becoming overwhelmed. While these are great in theory, in practice, I find these are rarely popular in anxious communities. It can be so hard to focus on external stimulus when there's just nothing easy, obvious, and tangible to grasp as your mind is racing. Some other research I was very taken by was a report by Bob Hershen, and that was analysing a group of women during the French Revolution called les tricoteuses. They were infamous for knitting whilst watching public beheadings and passed off by history as callous. Hershen suggests that the women may have been undisturbed by the guillotine because they knit, not the other way around. Acknowledging how repetitive hands-on tasks have been used for centuries to de-stress, he asked, how can this knowledge be useful? It's not always practical to carry around emergency knitting in times of stress. But you know what is practical to carry around? Jewelry. The portability and accessibility of jewelry lends itself to the discrete performance of stimming. There was such a distinct lack of physical products with positive connotations designed for people like me. So with the research on boding balls, worry beads, ancient meditation tools, I'd found a niche that fit me, and I started creating. Bringing my prototypes, back one, there we go. Bringing my prototypes into uni was an eye-opener. As Sophie said, I studied at Central St. Martin's. It's a world-leading institute in jewelry and fashion with designated crying rooms and a smoker's area full of nervous breakdowns. I noticed that in that environment, every time we had our critiques, my peers would ask to borrow my prototypes. Certain people were always drawn to particular pieces. The fingertip fidgeters chose the nimble forms, the two-handed paper twiddlers used the dual-ended shapes, and the smokers all went for the fiddlesticks. I started to realize perhaps this idea could help more than just me. I wasn't alone. Everyone was doing it. I guarantee once you start to notice it, you will see stimming everywhere. In my graduate collection, Cure for the Itch, each piece was created to suit 6 types of fiddlers that I identified. Over time, I progressed my concept into wearable jewelry items with the focus of satisfying different tactile needs, using kinetic spinning components, sharp grounding points, and engaging textures. These were my 6 different shapes that I identified during uni. One of those is bound to suit your type of fingers. My personal favourites, the one that I wear every day, are my point ring, the one in the centre there. It's just a simple band, but it has a secret weapon. It's hiding a point on the inside, and it's just sharp enough that when I push it and spin it on my finger, it pulls my attention in. My turn necklace, which you may have noticed I sit and fiddle with all the time, the centre spins. And I use it as a physical aid to count my breaths and just subtly hold myself in a protective way when I'm out in public. And my cusp ring. It's become a fast favourite for me. Having points on both sides means that it's super effective for disrupting my thoughts, and it's fast become my favourite panic attack tool. I think it looks pretty cool as well. One of my big inspirations for designs these days is the thought, oh, if only I could touch that. Hence, you'll see inspirations from wanting to touch classical marble sculptures, and in my new collection, created just for ITAKOM, as Sophie was mentioning, from natural textures carved into icebergs that I saw on my trip to Antarctica. Yes, me wishing I could get out and touch them all. It's caused by trapped air pushing up through the ice, slowly but surely leaving behind the tactile traces of the earth exhaling. As the saying goes, what you see with mental health is only the tip of the iceberg, and what we feel goes much deeper. This collection is made with that grounding texture and reminds you to breathe, and symbolizes the hidden depths that we're going to here at ITAKOM to explore neurodiversity. So, who's inspired me to do this? Music has been an enormous influence on how I view my neurodivergence. As a self-identified emo, a musical genre standing for emotional, the subculture provided me my first taste of feeling represented and understood. It was the first time I'd heard put into words what I felt and saw successful artists who had been through what I was going through. I wasn't alone, and there was hope for the future. The most influential band of my life was My Chemical Romance. The songwriter, Gerard Way, started the band as a response to the trauma of witnessing 9/11 and suffered from major depression and addiction. His motive was to make a difference in the world in the way that he knew how, musical creativity. Talking about the vulnerable nature of music, Gerard said, "My mission is to share my truth. That's what I think an artist is supposed to do. I think they're supposed to share." Chanting lyrics like, "I'm not afraid to keep on living with thousands of other people just like you" has a profound impact. And it's no wonder the fan base slogan is MCR Saved My Life. The mindset let me know that there was power in sharing my honest truth. And through my creativity, I could successfully make a positive change in the world. Part of the emo subculture that solidified our sense of unity was fashion. The self-expression creates a sense of community that makes you feel less alone, just like being more like yourself. In 2015, I was honored to be chosen as Saraband, the Alexander McQueen Foundation's first ever jewelry artist in residence. I was over the moon to be understood to align with McQueen's philosophy of being unapologetically different. McQueen said, "I came to terms with not fitting in a long time ago. I never really fitted in. I don't want to fit in." And now people are buying into that. Whilst McQueen suffered so deeply throughout his short life, his unusual mind created the most acclaimed and groundbreaking fashion of our generation and showed the world what a neurodivergent artist can do. So, how do I cope? I won't lie, sharing yourself and trying to find the positive sides of mental illness and run a business is not all inspirations and artistic rainbows. It's often crying over competition rejections, trying to find the energy to get up and work, and constantly apologizing for late emails. I found the best attitude has been to accept my capabilities for what they are. It's hard not to see these parts of myself as limitations. It's always going to frustrate me that I simply do not have the energy and mental stamina of a neurotypical person. It's always going to frustrate me that I'll be viewed as slow and lazy with no time management, when in reality I'm exhausted and overwhelmed and unable to keep track of my thoughts. But what else can I do? I can do what I can do. And that is where finding a niche that suits me has been key. So I can't work for fashion in fear of triggering my eating disorder. Now I've found my great passion in the friendlier world of jewelry. So I can't physically cope with a 9 to 5. Now I work the hours when I've got the energy and rest when I don't. So computer work gives me spaghetti brain. Now I've got a job that relies on the part of my brain I enjoy using. Just because my capabilities are different doesn't mean I can't have a career. I just had to do what let my differences shine. As a teen that thought one day I'd grow up and be cured, be fixed, be normal, I now know these conditions will always be a part of my life. If I'd told that to my 15-year-old self, that thought would have been too much to cope with. At 30, it's my driving force. My eureka moment was realizing I could use being me to my advantage and lean into what I'm good at. I can't write songs, I couldn't be a politician, and every January reminds me I genuinely could never be an accountant. Well, this is who I am, so why fight it? I'm an artist, and jewelry is my medium to make my voice count. Things become so much easier when you start working with what you've got instead of fighting to get what you think you should have. Neurodiversity means that by our very nature, we think differently to the norm. Once we can find that thing, that special, unique part that is different, we can shine. I've now achieved some awesome things, been in some magazines and won some awards, but would I accept my sometimes crippling diagnoses as a fair price to pay for these things? No, I wouldn't. I never want to misrepresent mental illness as fun or quirky, because most of the time it is debilitating. The reason I can handle it now is because my neurodiversity gives me purpose and an original point of view. My proudest moment was receiving a message from a teen whose mum had bought her a point ring to help with self-harm urges. She thanked me for doing what I do and called me an inspiration. I still get discriminated against professionally and dissuaded from pursuing my concept, but that girl made me remember why I stayed true to myself. Sharing honestly destigmatizes our lived experience in society and creates space for us to flourish in our own individual ways. Being neurodiverse doesn't mean we are limited, but that we have powerfully unique perspectives. We're not wrong. We're not alone. We're just ourselves. If it weren't for my mental illnesses, my life wouldn't be half as interesting. From my weird personality, friends, partner, job, embracing my weird is the key to enjoying my life to the fullest. I'm no longer ashamed to be me. In fact, embracing my neurodiverse self was the key to handling it all along. And if you'd like to come and find me afterwards, I'm down in the exhibition on Stand E. Feel free to come have a chat, have a play with some jewelry.
Hi, I'm Bérengère. I'm going to be chairing the short time that we have for the questions today. So if you have questions, please use the app, or if you can't use the app, that's fine. You can also come up and use one of the mics. There's one here and one over there as well. So the first question I have here is for Lotta. So in the workplace, how as an employer should we have a conversation with someone we manage who we think might have ADHD, and on the ways that we can support them, and how we can make the most of their skills in our particular company, for example?
Oh, that's a great question. How long did we have?
Like 1 minute.
No, but so if I understand you correctly, how can I, as a colleague or employer, have a good conversation? Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think we have to lean into these areas with great openness and respect. I recommend, after having a session like this, after reading a book, after trying to read up and gain the knowledge, try to stimulate a conversation where you don't act as an expert and also show that you're not. It's like, I have some basic knowledge about this, but I'm really, really interested. How is this for you? How would things work for you? Could we meet in the middle somehow? We can do some changes. We can do some adaptations. Would that help for you? Because I think what we do, we get very engaged, and then we mistake our own beliefs and knowledge for something that could be useful for someone else. That it's not necessarily the case. So I would say very open and try to engage in a conversation where you can move forward together.
Excellent, thank you so much. For Charlotte, have you had any difficulties being open and honest about your mental health when developing your early design?
Yeah, absolutely. it was very split, much like you were saying. You feel this need when you get your diagnosis. It's such a relief that you want to share with people. This is what it was all along. It's not that I was slow and lazy and all these things. There's something behind it. I'm not dramatic. And at first, like you say, people who are often in the same boat as you come forward and are like, oh yeah, me too. And you get a sense of camaraderie. Then you meet that brick wall, and that's when you start getting people that say like, oh, yeah, that's a bit weird, you know, the ever clinging word, oh, it's a bit much as well. And professionally as well, it did cling, especially when I started, you know, approaching big brands to work with and things like that. I was professionally advised, well, you know, try and avoid things like words like mental health and self-harm. You know, no one wants to hear about that. And I was like, but that's who I am. That's why I make it. So I'm not going to stop doing that. And that's the point. I've found the niche where that is appreciated. You're never going to please everyone. And there will always be people who don't want to understand out there. Hiding it in yourself doesn't make that go away. So finding a place at which you're comfortable, I think, is key. Because, of course, pushing yourself out there and, you know, showing it to everyone isn't comfortable for everyone. But just finding that balance where you don't feel like you're masking and that you're actually hiding an integral part of you is the right balance, really, to be able to live your life freely.
Thank you so much. And actually, just to build upon that, somebody, Roni, says, what an inspiration and thanks for sharing so courageously. Truly amazing.
Well, thank you.
And what message would you give your 15-year-old self today?
That's a good one. Look, I've got to say, actually, making that slide of the little me with the weird sign really broke my heart, because I wish I could go back and say, it is going to be not worth it, but there is something coming your way at the end of it. You know, once you've been suicidal and you've been through all those things and you just think, well, my life isn't going to change. It genuinely does. It can change. And that's the whole point, that having this unique perspective in life takes you in unusual places. It helps you meet unusual people. All the neurodiverse people I know and meet, we all have neurodiverse friends and partners, and we find each other, and we have like these strange and exciting lives that are unusual, and we wouldn't get any of these experiences if we hadn't have gone through those things. Not to say, of course, you can't have an exciting life without it, but of course, it does lead you in its own way through life. So I would tell myself, there are things coming for you because of this thing you hate so much. So don't give up.
Thank you. And sorry, we have so little time that I'm just going to ask one more question. There's so many and they're so all amazing, so I will be sharing them with you. So one last question for you both. How do we support Black and Asian ADHDers at work who have to navigate discrimination from their ADHD and also institutional racism?
I would say, having worked in workplaces where I have witnessed that in my fellow neurodiverse people who are Black and Asian, what we decided to do together was that to use our white privilege to speak up and stand up on their behalf. Of course, all of us were discriminated against for being neurodiverse, but recognizing your white privilege to be able to take that step that they might not have access to and speak up and use that to help each other.
Do you have any?
Yeah, and I think also to make sure that our message comes across to all different parts of the society. And in Sweden, we're seeing that more and more now, that there is kind of a doubt in certain groups of the society that drives the diagnostics and knowledge in a part of the society that is socioeconomically stronger. So that's really unfair. And we have to be attractive, we have to be relevant for all people. So we have to be aware of that ADHD, neurodevelopmental or neurodiversity is not a question of, no, it's never. So I think we have to work on that as professionals as well, to reach out to wherever we are and also look ourselves in the mirror and say, are we relevant here? Would you listen to me? I have to adapt my message so that it fits more people.
Well, thank you so much. And the comments are great. Everybody thanks you so much and finds you both truly inspiring. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending today's session. And I will now let you go to attend the keynotes.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Make sure you go down and look at Charlotte's collection. They are
Come and have a play.
And once again, thank you to our speakers.